The current number of serial killers on the loose and never caught in the US, according to recent FBI files, numbers between 20 and 50 very scary people. However, the worst, most evil serial killers are still active and alive in the hearts and minds of surviving friends and family forever. Number 5. Active during the 1960s, Jack the Stripper was one of the most evil serial killers who was never caught. Like the more famous Jack the Ripper, this less notorious individual also hunted in London and selected the same type of women, street workers. It was February of 1964 when the body of Hannah Tailford was found on the banks of the Thames River near the London Corinthian Sailing Club clubhouse, just west of Hammersmith Bridge. The deranged serial killer had taken her undergarments and stuffed them into her mouth. Over the next 12 months, 5 more bodies were left behind by the scary person, 4 in streets and alleyways, and 1 in a storage shed. They were all missing their clothing, hence the serial killer's nickname, and they were all deprived of oxygen. The famous murder mystery case prompted one of the largest manhunts in British history. Crime investigators wanted these murder cases solved and the serial killer caught, unlike the notorious Jack the Ripper from 2 centuries earlier. Police interviewed thousands of criminal suspects and eventually narrowed down their list of suspects to just 3 scary people of interest. After crime investigators revealed that they had narrowed down their list of suspects, the unsolved murder mystery cases mysteriously stopped. Coincidentally, this was around the time one of the suspects, a man named Mundo Ireland, took his own life. At a number of unsolved murder cases, a crime scene investigator found the same strange specks of paint strewn about. The clue was eventually linked to a vehicle spray shop on Heron Trading Estate, which wasn't far from where one of the bodies was found. Mundo Ireland was linked to that same estate. He was suspected of being the notorious serial killer for many years, but it later emerged that he had been in Scotland at the time of some of the crimes, and so the true mystery was never solved. Other murder mystery suspects included Freddie Mills, a boxer, and Harold Jones. Alternatively, some of the true crime community have speculated the crimes were committed by not one scary person, but by a number of scary people who were collaborating together and were never caught. Number 4. The Munsterland Killer was an infamously notorious serial killer who took the lives of 4 women in the Munsterland region of Germany in the 1970s. Despite a reward for information and having the serial killer's DNA on file, he has never been caught by law enforcement agents. All of his unsolved cases involved young women with slight builds and dark hair, who were between 18 and 23. Each had met unexpected endings after getting into a car with the unidentified serial killer. The first was Edeltraud van Boxel, a street worker who was seen getting into a bright-colored Volkswagen on the evening of November 21, 1971. The witness, also a street worker, assumed that she'd found a paying customer at the time. A few hours later, Edeltraud's body was found on a dirt road by a shocked farmer. Months would pass before a woman named Barbara Storm vanished after leaving a club in May of 1972. Presumably at the hands of the Munsterland Killer. Some time passed before the serial killer struck again. This time, a woman by the name of Marlies Hemmers was hitchhiking with her boyfriend when they became part of an unsolved true crime mystery. The two split up, reasoning that they had a better chance of hitching a ride as individuals. Later on, the boyfriend briefly saw Marlies ride past in the passenger seat of a passing dark green car. She didn't react at all when he waved to her. She was reported as a missing person case when she didn't arrive at their agreed meeting point. The final target was 22-year-old Erica Kunz. The young woman was hitchhiking home from the university library when the serial killer attacked. According to crime reports regarding this unsolved case, a gray Mercedes was later seen driving extremely slowly along a road, looking for an entrance into the forest. Days later, Erica's missing body was found near the spot where the Mercedes had been seen creeping past. After 4 horrible crimes, the Munsterland killer apparently stopped being active and simply vanished into thin air. Crime scene investigators were able to connect these 3 unsolved cases only because the bodies had been taken to the same dumping ground. Forensic investigators found evidence of the serial killer's DNA under Barbara's nails while she was fighting for her life. And sometime in the 1990s, the DNA found at the crime scene was compared to a potential suspect. The results of the forensic investigation showed that their suspect was not the criminal responsible, and the unsolved case went cold. Since then, the cold case files have been reopened a number of times, but no match for this mysterious serial killer was ever found. Number 3. The Tube Sock murder mystery cases are believed to be the work of an unidentified serial killer who took the lives of at least 4 people in Mineral, Washington, and possibly others too. In August of 1985, Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper worked at a vocational school in Tacoma and were on summer vacation. They decided to take a weekend camping trip to Tule Lake, not knowing that an active serial killer was on the loose. When neither Stephen nor Ruth turned up for work the next Monday, they were reported as 2 missing people 2 days after they were last seen alive. Stephen's missing body was eventually found by hikers in his sleeping bag. Their lifeless dog was also found at the campsite, but Ruth was still a missing person case. Crime scene investigators did not believe Ruth was responsible for the unsolved murder mystery for a number of reasons. At the time, the notorious serial killer Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, was still at large. When he was active, he would often target couples, unexpectedly ending the lives of men quickly before taking his time with women. Crime scene investigators didn't believe the Californian serial killer was responsible for the case in Washington, but a scary person getting inspired by him was a real possibility at the time. Ruth's remains were found after 2 months, half a mile away. She had a tube sock around her neck, though detectives determined that this was not the cause of her passing. Months later, Michael Reimer, Diana Robertson, and their young daughter planned a camping trip. As the story goes, on December 12th, the day the couple was last seen, their daughter was found abandoned in a Kmart parking lot. She was unable to tell authorities what had happened or where her parents were. When asked about Diana, the daughter just said that her mother was in the trees. Searches of the area would turn up nothing until February, when Diana's body was found near Mike's pickup truck. The serial killer had used a bladed weapon 17 times. Like Ruth, a tube sock was used to restrict her breathing. Meanwhile, Mike was nowhere to be found. Investigators noted his criminal history of getting physical with Ruth, and it was speculated that he was the serial killer in this crime story. The tube sock is too much of a coincidence for detectives not to suspect the crimes are linked. For decades, what had happened to Mike remained an unsolved mystery. It wasn't until 2011 that Mike's remains were found not far from where their police had discovered Diana decades earlier. It was impossible to determine how he had passed away. Even with the last body found, investigators still cannot solve this murder mystery. Case detectives remain uncertain as to whether or not an unidentified serial killer had taken Mike's life, or if Mike had taken the life of Diana and then his own. Number 2. The Oklahoma City Butcher is a disturbing, infamous serial killer who was never caught after taking the lives of 3 Native American women between 1976 and 1986. The serial killer was particularly twisted and seemed to enjoy toying with the police in a deranged true crime mystery that has never been solved. The first body was discovered on April 1st, 1976, when a group of utility workers were exploring an abandoned house filled with trash. One knocked over a popcorn bucket and discovered a woman's head. When they called the police department, law enforcement officials thought this crime story was an April Fool's Day prank. When they went to check out the house, they discovered it was a very real murder mystery instead. The woman was initially thought to be white, homeless, and between 25 and 35 years old. Forensic tests revealed to investigators that she was actually Native American and between 18 and 22. The rest of her remains were found throughout the abandoned house in pieces. Years later, the crime story was beginning to fade from people's memory when, in 1979, the unidentified serial killer struck again that April. Another body belonging to a Native American woman was found. A dog had discovered a head in an alleyway near a basketball court where some kids were playing. In a strange but true twist, the woman's missing remains had been scattered over several blocks. All the remains had been carefully washed, and some were wrapped in newspaper or brown paper bags. Even as police identified the woman as Arlie Bell Killian, the person responsible for taking her life was continuing to dispose of her remains throughout the city, toying with investigators. For years, the people of Oklahoma City lived with a dangerous serial killer on the loose. The criminal was believed to be a native who knew the city well based on the places he'd chosen to hide Arlie's scattered remains. Then, in 1986, the notorious butcher became active and struck again. As before, the unknown serial killer took the life of 22-year-old Marcia Sanders and left her remains scattered about for law enforcement to find. These secret places for these grisly crime scene clues included a small alleyway behind a man's garden. The head was found a week later. There was a small break in the case in 1993 when the first victim was identified as Kathy Lynn Shackelford, a woman whose family had been searching for her for the past 17 years after running away from home. Her cousin contacted police, who realized the Oklahoma Jane Doe case was the missing woman. Sadly, although the missing Jane Doe case has been solved, it doesn't seem to have brought them any closer to identifying the mysterious serial killer who is still at large. Number 1. The Monster of Florence is an infamous serial killer who was active in Florence for 17 years. The famous serial killer took the lives of 16 people, but his identity remains unknown. The horrible crimes began in August of 1968 after Barbara Losai and her brother-in-law Antonio Lobianco spent the evening at the cinema. Barbara's husband was sick, so they took her young son with them. After the film, they drove to a private location in Sigma when an unidentified person pointed at Barbara and Antonio and fired. Barbara's husband was investigated and eventually imprisoned for the crime, but 6 years later, 2 more attacks would use the same type of weapon. Like in the earlier case, the serial killer attacked while the couple were parked in a local makeout spot. After 7 years of not getting caught, the serial killer became active again. In 1981, 2 more couples were claimed by the Monster of Florence. Between 1983 and 1985, 8 more lives were lost, all but 2 were couples. The only 2 who were not a couple were Wilhelm Meyer and Jens Rusch, a pair of German students. Both were male, but Jens had long hair, and police believed the probable serial killer mistook them for a couple. A number of scary people were arrested for the crimes, and even convicted, but it soon became clear that the active serial killer was still at large when he struck again. In 1994, a man named Pietri Passiani was convicted. Passiani had a history of violence and had already spent time in prison for taking the life of another man. But the only evidence linking him to the serial killer's crimes was an unused bullet that was the same make as the ones used. The ruling was later overturned. A new trial was scheduled for Passiani, but he passed away before it could take place. Instead, 2 people who were believed to be his accomplices were put on trial. They were convicted in 4 of the 8 crimes, but many disagree with the ruling. The Monster of Florence officially remains an unidentified serial killer, with everything from scary cults, the Zodiac Killer, and other scary people being suggested as possible explanations from the baffled true crime community. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.